This is a CBS News Special Report, part of our continuing coverage of the White House under fire. From Washington, here is Dan Rather.
Good day. 0 hour on a steamy, muggy, and defining day for President Clinton and Special Prosecutor Ken Starr's investigation of the president's personal life. At this hour, President Clinton is scheduled to begin his closed-door sworn testimony live from inside the White House. That's testimony to Special Prosecutor Starr and Starr's grand jury. Now, the testimony will be sent to the grand jury by scrambled signal television hookup. That'll be direct to the courthouse where the Starr federal grand jury members will watch and listen. The president's aides say that he will tell, and I quote, the whole truth, unquote. White House officials are making contingency plans, underscore the word please, contingency plans for the president to address the nation tonight after his testimony. Now, reports circulated on Capitol Hill that possibly be at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, but let me underscore that that has not been confirmed. Best we can determine, no final decision has been made yet on whether the president will in fact address the nation, much less the precise hour. As for what's happening right now, let's go to CBS News White House correspondent Scott Pelley. Scott?
Dan, a source tells CBS News that the process has begun. The president has entered the map room on the ground floor of the White House. The door has closed. His testimony will be underway in just a few moments. About half an hour ago, independent counsel Kenneth Starr and several of his deputies arrived at the White House. They drove in through a south gate and were immediately escorted to the map room in the White House. That is on the ground floor of the White House. The map room is so called because that's where FDR used to survey the battle maps in World War II. The president will be seated in there before a television camera. Prosecutors and defense attorneys will be with him. The signal will be transmitted about half a mile away to the U.S. District Courthouse, where 23 grand jurors will watch the president on live television and will actually be allowed to ask their own questions by passing those questions through prosecutors on the telephone. A little bit earlier this morning, the president's lawyers arrived at the White House. David Kendall and Nicole Seligman were seen coming in the south entrance. They have been working with the president all weekend long preparing his testimony. Sources tell CBS News that the president is now prepared to admit to a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky, but he is going to claim that he did not commit perjury in the Paula Jones sexual harassment suit. Mr. Clinton will say that the kind of sex that he and Lewinsky had was not covered under a legal definition in the Paula Jones suit. Dan?
Scott Pelley at the White House. Let's go now to our CBS News Washington Bureau and our chief Washington correspondent, Bob Schieffer. Bob, give us an overview here, an analysis of what is going on, what the reaction on Capitol Hill is insofar as we know it up to this moment.
Well, I think, first of all, Dan, this is a crossroads. This story is moving beyond where it was. I'm not sure any of us know where we are, but it's moving beyond where it was. This is a big deal in every sense of the word. From here on, this is going to be a different story both for this president and for all of us that are covering it. As for Capitol Hill wants this thing to be over. What Congress is hoping and praying for is that somehow this can be resolved and it won't be dumped in Congress's lap. Politicians hate the unknown. They don't know what the impact of this, either Democrats or Republicans, what the impact of this will be on the November election. So they're hoping in some way for some kind of conclusion. Another kind of interesting thing, Dan, about 3 minutes ago, I was talking to somebody at the White House, and within the White House, the president apparently is very determined to keep a kind of business as usual, a normal kind of atmosphere there. The last thing he did before he went into this meeting with Ken Starr, he had a foreign policy and a chief of staff meeting with a pretty sizable part of his staff there. One of the people who was in the meeting said this was a real briefing. The president was very centered, he was very focused, and he asked a lot of questions. So the president, at least if for nothing else, for the benefit of the staff, he's trying to keep up a business as usual atmosphere within the White House.
Bob Schieffer, let's underscore that CBS News has confirmed again that the testimony has begun. It has started. The grand jury at the courthouse is now hearing questions to the president and the questions answers. The answers from the president. Now, this is likely to go on for some hours. All anyone can do is guess about how long. Most estimates are that it will go on for at least 4 hours and possibly as many as 7 or 7.5 or 8 hours. But let me emphasize, those are guesses. Let's go now to our CBS News legal consultant, attorney Kristen Jeanette Myers. Kristen, let's italicize the word if it turns out, as a lot of people are now reporting, including CBS News, that the president's intention is to, in effect, say, I did have inappropriate behavior with Monica Lewinsky, perhaps go beyond, but says that much. This will, in many people's minds, be a case of his changing his testimony. What I want to get from you is some sense of how this will change his legal position and what happens in the future, if indeed it does.
Dan, what President Clinton said when he was under oath in the Paula Jones deposition was that he did not have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky, and there was a very specific definition that included many different kinds of sex. And President Clinton said no. Well, if he's going to testify that they did have an inappropriate relationship, but that it consisted of sex not mentioned in that very specific legal definition, then for the point of perjury, it could be a way out. But don't forget, there's also the charges of obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and all sorts of things that Ken Starr is alleging there may be proof of and that he is investigating. But as to the perjury, it could be that he can wiggle out of the specific definition if he says that it was just a different kind of sex. Dan?
Kristen Jeanette Myers, one thing about it today, before this day is over, whatever the president is going to say or not say, the grand jury will have been said. Let's go back to the White House lawn and CBS News White House correspondent Scott Pelley. Scott, you have an update on something, I understand.
Dan, the president's top advisors are telling us that the president himself has been working on some thoughts for an address to the nation. The staff is working on some contingency plans for an address tonight. One top advisor to the president told us he would be shocked if the president did not speak to the public on television tonight.
Well, on a day like this, sometimes shocks happen. I want to call your attention, just for whatever it may be worth, if anything, that a small crowd has gathered here outside the White House. You know, for those of you familiar with Washington, in the deep distance, the Jefferson Memorial, then the Washington Monument, the White House itself, all leading down to the mud flats of the Potomac, and there in front of the White House, a rather small crowd, but one that's been increasing in size at this hour, is gathering, just people wanting to be outside the White House on what they and nearly everybody else believes will be a pivotal day. CBS News and this CBS station will be tracking developments throughout this history-making day. CBS will flash on to bring you accurate and hard facts. I want you to understand that we're trying hard to be pillars of accuracy this day. So whenever and if warranted, we'll flash on with hard information. And of course, we'll have complete details on tonight's CBS Evening News, and later in the evening, including a possible, underscore the word possible, speech that the president may deliver to the nation. For now, Dan Rather, CBS News in Washington, with Scott Pelley, Bob Schieffer, and Kristen Jeanette Myers. We'll see you as the trail winds on.
This has been a CBS News Special Report.
This in the air.
Police have been chasing this motorcyclist all throughout the Bronx.
And on the ground.
Street closing should be lifted by the morning.
Security has been tightened in the wake of the bombings.
No one covers a story like the reporters of News 2.
The Dow will be up from yesterday.
The accident took place over here.
So far, they have no suspects.
Get it first.
Office buildings and street.
Not sure anymore.
You know, it's a terrible thing that our president lies to the United States people. I think if he just told the truth, he would be much better off.
I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again.
What if he tells the truth tonight that he did a little lying?
I think everybody should forgive him because we all make little mistakes in life, and it is a human thing that he did, so it's not really that bad.
Can you guess what story we're asking about today?
Get lice. To kill lice in their eggs, get maximum strength Rid. It's so effective, it kills lice completely. And Rid leaves no active residue behind. Nothing is more
How about a lightning rod, guys?
Mr. Clinton acknowledges.
Good, okay, that's a good idea.
The thing to understand about today's testimony is that for prosecutors, establishing a sexual relationship was not the goal today. It was just the beginning.
Good evening. I heard Scott.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting tonight from Washington.
Good evening. Bulletin from Washington. It's over. President Clinton's testimony before the Ken Starr grand jury ended just a few moments ago. It lasted about 5.5 hours. That included a break. We don't know for exactly how long that break was, but basically the president answered the questions from Ken Starr and his prosecutors, and if there were any, from the grand jurors themselves, for about 5.5 hours. But now it's over. We go to CBS News White House correspondent Scott Pelley. Scott?
Dan, at this hour, the White House staff is preparing for a presidential address to the nation that could come about 10 o'clock Eastern Time, but the president has not made a final decision on whether to proceed with that. This marks the first time in American history that a president has testified before a criminal grand jury. Two sources familiar with Mr. Clinton's defense have told CBS News that Mr. Clinton intended to acknowledge a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. But perhaps the most important thing to understand about today's testimony is that for prosecutors, establishing a sexual relationship was not the goal. It was just the beginning. By the time Ken Starr arrived at the White House, his grand jury had already amassed substantial evidence of a sexual relationship. Today's questioning was designed to ask whether Mr. Clinton conspired to tamper with witnesses and conceal evidence in order to beat a lawsuit. The suit and the root of the entire scandal is the Paula Jones sexual harassment case. Today's testimony is believed to have covered much more than Lewinsky. Other questioning was expected to include, did the president lie when he denied Paula Jones' claim that he pressured her for sex in a Little Rock hotel? Did he conspire to cover up an incident in which Kathleen Willey claims Mr. Clinton forced himself on her in the Oval Office suite? And did the president agree with Lewinsky to deny their affair under oath? And did he ask her to get rid of evidence that was under subpoena? The testimony began at 1 o'clock on the ground floor of the White House residence. The president was seated in the map room where FDR once reviewed battle maps during World War II. Mr. Clinton was to be questioned by Starr and his deputies. In a rare, if not unprecedented, concession, the president's defense team was allowed to attend and raise objections. A live television signal was sent from the map room to the courthouse about half a mile away. There, 23 grand jurors watched. They were allowed to ask their own questions relayed through prosecutors. The last time Mr. Clinton swore an oath was in the Jones deposition, in which he said, quote, "I have never had sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. I have never had an affair with her." His lawyers argue that wasn't perjury because Mr. Clinton does not believe the alleged Oval Office liaisons with Lewinsky fit a technical definition of affair. But Mr. Clinton's political advisors fear they have no way to explain his repeated public denials.
All I know is what I have read here. There is not a sexual relationship, an improper sexual relationship, or any other kind of improper relationship.
I'd like for you to have more rather than less, sooner rather than later.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
I am looking forward to the opportunity in the next few days of testifying. I will do so completely and truthfully. I am anxious to do it.
Sources tell CBS News that Mr. Clinton himself has written down some thoughts on how to apologize to the nation. We are expecting a decision by the president any minute now on whether he will do so about 10 o'clock Eastern Time tonight. Dan.
Scott, hang on there, but to our audience, folks, this is live television. We expect that David Kendall, the president's personal attorney, will come out sometime soon to say something. When that happens, we'll go immediately to it. We'll go to it right away. Now, Scott, what happens next now that Starr appears to have his testimony? Next move?
Dan, it's not inconceivable at all that he might recall Monica Lewinsky to the grand jury to have her comment on what the president had to say in his testimony. All of this is going into a report to Congress. Sources tell CBS News, allies of Ken Starr tell CBS News that Starr already believes he has substantial evidence of impeachable offenses, and that report may go to Congress in as little as 3 to 5 weeks.
Scott Pelley at the White House. Now, Ken Starr believes he has enough evidence for impeachment. But what's Congress's view of all this? There's a lot of watching and listening going on in the Congress, but so far, not all that much talking. And as CBS News chief Washington correspondent Bob Schieffer reports, that is by carefully calculated design. Bob?
Well, Dan, what members of Congress are really hoping in their heart of hearts is that somehow the president could explain this in a way that it won't be dumped in their laps before the fall elections. Republicans don't want to deal with it because they know the president's job approval ratings are high, and they're afraid it could backfire on them. Democrats don't want to touch it because, frankly, they're afraid they'll get some of it on them. Congress is so easy it made for a rare Washington day. You could hardly find a politician willing to comment. Republican Speaker Gingrich referred all calls to Judiciary Committee Chairman Henry Hyde. An aide said Hyde was unavailable. Senate Democratic leader Tom Daschle was said to be traveling and out of telephone contact, as was House Democratic leader Dick Gephardt. Even the vice president was in Hawaii, about as far as you can get from Washington without leaving the United States. Only Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Orrin Hatch was talking. He's been urging the president to speak out, but said there should be no mystery about the timing.
American people aren't stupid. They know that he could have done this 7 months ago, and it would have been much more acceptable then. They know that the reason, if he does do it today, they know that the reason he's doing it is because he has to.
And Dan, my guess is that it's going to be a week or so before we hear much of any reaction. One Republican strategist told me today, we are telling our people to just let this happen. There'll be time to talk later. I translate that to mean we won't hear much until both sides have run some polls.
Thanks, Bob. We'll see if you're right. Now, with the president's grand jury testimony over for her part, First Lady Hillary Clinton remained staunch first defender. The Reverend Jesse Jackson talked around midnight with Mrs. Clinton and daughter Chelsea, and also the president. Jackson said the president, quote, would rather face the grand jury and press with their hostility than face Hillary and Chelsea with their hostility. Fortunately, they are greeting him with devotion, end of quotation. CBS's Bill Plant has more on Hillary for the defense. Bill?
Dan, if there is anyone for whom this day may be as difficult as it has been for the president, it is his wife. Bill Clinton stands to be embarrassed by what he said today, but Hillary Rodham Clinton stands to be humiliated. Nonetheless, she and daughter Chelsea chose to remain here instead of departing on their scheduled vacation last week. Mrs. Clinton was not in the room for today's testimony and has not appeared in public except to go with her husband to church yesterday. Stories over the weekend portrayed her as withdrawn and gloomy. But sources close to the first family insist that's not true and tell CBS News that Hillary Clinton has taken an active part in preparing the president for his testimony.
Well, I probably know him better than anybody.
6 days after the scandal first broke, the First Lady was asked on the Today Show if people should expect a president to resign if he had committed adultery and lied about it. She stood by him.
If all that were proven true, I think that would be a very serious offense. That is not going to be proven true.
Friends of Mrs. Clinton say that she probably didn't know back then whether Lewinsky's story was true. Now, however, sources say the First Lady is aware that her husband is changing his story. And yet, at a time when many people might think the president's only truly devoted admirer is his dog Buddy, his wife is sticking with him. Their friends say that even after all that they've been through, Bill and Hillary Clinton are mortified that their private lives are becoming a public legal issue. But they blame Kenneth Starr for that, not Bill Clinton. And that may make it a little easier between them as they head off now for a 2-week vacation. Dan?
Bill Plant, another of our White House correspondents. Now, with the president's grand jury testimony over just a few moments ago, Ken Starr left the White House with his staff. These are photographs taken just a few moments ago of the special prosecutor. You heard shouted questions, a wave, a smile. He disappears into his Ford Victoria automobile and drives away. Now, whatever the impact of today's testimony, now that it's over, whatever the impact is on the president's family, on the public, on the country, this is not an ending. It's a turning point, but not an ending. CBS's Eric Engberg is tracking the impeachment potential part of the story.
Now the saga of the president and the intern moves to a new stage, the House of Representatives. Starr hasn't told Congress anything, but the language of the law is clear. He must advise the House if he turns up anything that may constitute grounds for an impeachment.
Well, I think most of us anticipate it'll be a truckload of documents.
House Republicans have given the task to the Judiciary Committee.
The committee will be in order.
Just as was done with the Nixon impeachment. The chairman, as Peter Rodino was then, is still the key. This time it's Henry Hyde of Illinois, 74, a rapier-tongued conservative who is regarded by Democrats as partisan but fair. His staff will be led by David Shippers, Chicagoan, one-time prosecutor, lifelong Democrat. The Democrats have made Abby Lowell, a veteran defense lawyer, their top staffer. The committee members will decide first if the evidence warrants a full inquiry.
It might well be that after reviewing all this material, the House Judiciary Committee determines, like a prosecutor would, we're not going to go further.
But if a majority wants to go further, the full House will vote on upgrading to an impeachment investigation.
I think there would be hearings. I think they would have to bring in a lot of the people that are involved here. We would have a reenactment of a lot of what went on in the grand jury.
The Constitution is vague on what's impeachable, leaving great wiggle room for Congress.
The problem is we don't really know what a high crime and misdemeanor is.
If impeachment were voted by the House, the Senate would then decide whether to convict and oust the president.
Starr probably would not try to prosecute the president while he's still in office. Too many legal questions. But there's no doubt Starr has the legal authority to try to indict the president after he's left office, no matter how he leaves. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
It has now been confirmed the President of the United States will address the American people tonight at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. That's 10 o'clock Eastern Time. That'd be 7 o'clock in the West. CBS News, of course, will carry that. In addition, CBS News plans special broadcasts before the President addresses the nation at 10 o'clock. Our current intention is to be on the air at least a half hour before that, but we'll keep you posted. Again, I remind you, this is live television. This story covering it right now is like trying to put a fan belt on a moving Mercedes or something, so we're trying to keep you right up to date. But it's official. The President will report to the nation tonight at 10 o'clock. Now, we're going to regroup here and give you more coverage in just a moment.
This is a CBS News Special Report, part of our continuing coverage of the White House under fire. From Washington, here is Dan Rather.
And we're bringing the nation as a whole into our CBS Evening newscast with live coverage as we go to David Kendall, the president's attorney.
Testified for more than 4 hours about his relationship with Ms. Lewinsky and the questions he was asked about that relationship in the Jones deposition last January. He testified truthfully. We're hopeful that the president's testimony will finally bring closure to the independent counsel's more than 4-year and over $40 million investigation, which has culminated in an investigation of the president's private life. The president would like me to reserve his opportunity to discuss his testimony himself, and he will do so in an address tonight at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Thank you.
Live from the White House, David Kendall.
Change his testimony?
The president's lawyer, David Kendall, with Nicole Seligman, who is his assistant. Now, as you heard, David Kendall didn't give much. There was a tip-off in what he said, however. There's been a struggle during the day, a debate during the day, of whether the president or his attorney should say anything, even that could be interpreted as critical of the special prosecutor. As you saw and heard, David Kendall did do that by pointing out that the Kenneth Starr investigation has taken more than 4 years and spent more than $40 million of taxpayer money. Now, headlines of this hour, breaking news. The president's grand jury testimony is over. He was in there for about 5.5 hours. Kendall said he actually testified for a little over 4 hours. They took a break. But headline of tomorrow, president ends his grand jury testimony. Headline of this hour and another headline of tomorrow, President Clinton will address the nation tonight at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. That, of course, would be 9 in the Central Time Zone and 7 out west. And CBS News coverage will begin before the president's address at 10. More about that later. Let's go right now to Scott Pelley at the White House. Scott?
Dan, the idea of a presidential address has been considered here at the White House at least for the last 48 hours. Last night, senior advisors told me that the president himself was working on some notes on exactly what to say to the nation. We are told that 2 drafts were written today for the president. The president will certainly modify them as he has in other speeches in the past. We are told that the speeches are likely to be an apology to the nation, an explanation of his situation with Monica Lewinsky, a limited explanation, I should say. And also, one of the open questions now is whether he will take on Ken Starr, and if so, how forcefully. We are told that the drafts that are being written now are about 5 to 10 minutes in length, and the president will certainly be working on them between now and 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Dan?
Scott Pelley at the White House. Now, since David Kendall, the president's attorney, has come out, basically announced the president was going to address the nation tonight at 10 o'clock, didn't say much more, but there were some telltale signs of what the president's positioning is going to be now that he's finished his grand jury testimony. Let's go for a quick analysis, insofar as there can be any, to our chief Washington correspondent, Bob Cheever. Bob, you watched and listened to Kendall. Give us some perspective and context.
I don't think there's very much to be added to what he said. I think we're just going to have to wait, Dan, and see what the president now has to say. I agree with you. He managed to take a little shot at the independent counsel there. Certainly he didn't have to do that. That may give us some hint of what the tone of the president's address is going to be tonight. But I think what we have to look for now is the president going to change the story he gave. Every indication is that he's going to give some sort of an apology to the nation. How much detail is he going to go into? Is he going to take complete responsibility for this? These are questions that we're just going to have to wait. I don't think you can analyze very much what David Kendall said. We're just going to have to wait and see what the president says.
And the president will be speaking at 10 o'clock tonight, Eastern Time, 9 in the Central Time Zone, and 7 in the West. Now, this has been a CBS News Special Report. We're going to say goodbye from the CBS Evening News and our special report coverage to our stations in the West. And the rest of you, stick with us. We'll have more information on the CBS Evening News after we take a quick break.
This has been a CBS News Special Report.
There is some important news beyond Washington tonight. For that, we begin with CBS's Jim Stewart on the hunt for whoever bombed the U.S. Embassy in Kenya, killing 247 people.
They were still finding body parts inside the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi today, even as FBI agents questioned a suspect who reportedly had bragged to authorities after being arrested in Pakistan that he and 6 other men were responsible for the blast. U.S. investigators in Kenya today, however, said the suspect has not admitted responsibility to them for the bombing, nor had he implicated anyone else. Agents say they hope to confront the suspect with details of the attack that only the bomber would know, including the type of explosives used. Meanwhile, hundreds of U.S. personnel and their dependents in Pakistan were told today to get out of the country as quickly as possible. Intelligence sources say specific threats have been received against Americans there since the arrest of the Kenyan bombing suspect. Jim Stewart, CBS News, Washington.
I'm Tom Fenton in Northern Ireland, where several arrests have been made in Saturday's bombing, and suspicion focuses on a splinter group of the IRA. Northern Ireland has never seen a mass murder on this scale. Both Catholics and Protestants were slaughtered indiscriminately. The long list of dead includes a grandmother, her daughter pregnant with twins, and her grandchild.
Whoever did it has no mind. They have no heart. They couldn't have.
The people of this community haven't yet had time to think of the big picture of what this means for the future of the peace agreement in Northern Ireland. In this small community, everybody knows someone who was killed or injured in the endless sectarian war they had prayed was finally ended. Tom Fenton, CBS News, Omagh, Northern Ireland.
I'm Richard Threlkeld in Moscow. On Friday, Russian President Boris Yeltsin vowed not to devalue the Russian ruble and insisted he would remain on vacation. Today, after hearing from the International Monetary Fund, Yeltsin was back at the office. The ruble was effectively devalued by as much as a third, and Russia suspended billions of dollars in international loan obligations for at least 3 months. The Kremlin claims it's doing all this to protect ordinary Russians from currency speculators. In fact, it's designed to protect Russia's overextended banks from going broke. The victims are those ordinary Russians who will soon find everything's going to cost a whole lot more. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, Moscow.
This big international story, the devaluation of the ruble had impact well beyond Russia. It helped to push stock prices lower on the volatile stock markets in the Far East. On America's Wall Street today, the blue chips soared. The Dow Industrials closed up 149 points. The index now stands 763 points below the all-time high it hit 1 month ago today. Over on the NASDAQ, the composite index there gained 27 points. Now we'll have more of our CBS News coverage of the rapidly developing story here in Washington in a moment. Just before and while we've been on the air with this broadcast, there have been these developments. The president's testimony before Ken Starr, his prosecutors, and the grand jury investigating possible criminal acts has ended. The president's personal attorney, David Kendall, came out and spoke the least possible words, basically saying that the grand jury testimony was over. The president had answered questions fully. Kendall took what could be interpreted as a perspective shot, if you will, at Ken Starr by pointing out that he's been working for more than 4 years, spent more than $40 million, and Kendall announced that the President of the United States himself will address the American public tonight at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Those are the developments. Now, for context, perspective, background on this, we go back to the White House and CBS News correspondent Scott Pelley. Scott?
Dan, obviously the next thing to look for is the president's address to the nation at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Last night I asked one of the president's senior advisors whether the White House staff was preparing a speech for the president. He said that they were preparing some notes for the president, but he said, quote, "This is one that the president is going to have to write for himself." Certainly, this will be the most difficult address Mr. Clinton has made to the nation. The last time that he spoke to the American people on this subject, you'll recall the words, "I want you to listen to me. I did not have sexual relations with that woman." Later tonight, essentially, Mr. Clinton is expected to take all of that back and apologize to the people for misleading them. Dan?
Thanks, Scott Pelley. We want to underscore that's what's expected that the president will do. We do not, in fact, know what it is that he's going to do. Now, the president himself has been working on a draft of what he would say tonight. He's expected to talk somewhere in the range of 6 to 10 minutes, not any more than that. That is the expectation. I repeat for emphasis that CBS News will be on the air later tonight at 9:30 Eastern Time before the president makes his address at 10. We'll have more on the evening news in just a moment. The President of the United States addresses the nation tonight at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. It'll be interesting to see and hear what he says, how much he says, how he says it, exactly what words he uses. CBS News special coverage of the President's address will begin at 9:30 Eastern Time tonight. Until then, Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News.
CBS.com for news 24 hours a day. Experience CBS News.